So far, you've developed a basic understanding of conditionals. You've been exposed to the more traditional conditional sentences that are neat and tidy and follow predictable rules. But as I'm sure you're already aware by now, like many other languages, English is full of irregularities. On the one hand, it can be frustrating because it makes learning English a little trickier. But on the other hand, once you get the hang of it, it's exciting to be able to construct all these different sentence structures despite the irregularities that made it difficult for you initially. It's also very useful to be able to show your IELTS examiner that you're aware of irregularities and that you can create grammatical sentences regardless. So, as you may have guessed, today we'll be looking at some conditional sentence structures that are a little different and may take a while to get used to. For today, I ask you to be patient with yourself if you don't immediately understand how to create these sentences, because even for native speakers, these are difficult ideas to grasp. But I am confident that this lesson will be a worthwhile introduction to these types of conditionals. You need to start developing your understanding somewhere, and this lesson is a great place to start. Regular verbs. These are important for conditionals. Conditionals require a wide range of tenses, and if you're not familiar with irregular verbs, you're going to use the wrong verb forms, which is not ideal. But don't worry, because we're going to shape up your knowledge on that today. Next, by the end of this lesson, you'll have a broad understanding of mixed conditionals. You'll understand the concept and why these sentences are the way they are. By the end of the lesson, you'll also know the difference between tense and time. This differentiation is at the core of mixed conditional sentences. But before we begin, let's chat about your Lesson 2 challenge and make sure we are still on the same page about Type 2 and Type 3 conditionals. In the last lesson, I challenged you to write appropriate conditional sentences to answer the following questions. What if you had more free time? And John's houseplants died. What if he had watered his plants? Let's start with the first question. What if you had more free time? Would the answer to this question be the Type 2 or Type 3 conditional? It would be Type 2. Why Type 2? Well, that's because the condition is unlikely. If you usually don't have much free time, it's unlikely that it would change. Of course, it is possible, but it's unlikely, since the reality seems to be quite set in stone. If you are dreaming about having more free time, that's probably because your current lifestyle doesn't allow for much free time. And as you know, it is quite difficult to just switch lifestyles. So, what would you do if you had more free time? Of course, we already know that the condition is I had more free time. That's the event that influences the situation. Now, in my case, if I had more free time, I would read more. We all know that reading is extremely important, even for native speakers. Okay, so that is the result. And in what tense is the condition? It's in past simple tense. Don't let that had fool you. Had is the past tense of have. Have can also mean to possess something. So just because you see the word had doesn't mean that it's necessarily past perfect tense. In this case, it's past simple. Now, what about the result? What's going on there? Well, the result form is would plus the base form of the verb. As you know, the base form of the verb is the simplest form, without any suffixes or tenses added to it. So let's go ahead and make the sentence in type 2 conditional. We've got our condition and our result. As you know, first we add the word if. And that's because if is always before the condition. It shows that there is a relationship between the condition and the result. Next, we add the comma. And the comma is what separates the two clauses. Remember that the condition is in past simple tense and the result is in the form would plus the base form of the verb. And there you have it. Did you get the sentence right? Now let's go over to the next sentence. What if John had watered his plants? Is this the type 2 or type 3 conditional? It's the type 3 conditional. So why type 3? Well, that's because we're talking about a hypothetical past situation. John might regret not having watered his plants and letting his plants die. John can't change the past, but we can imagine what might have happened if the past were different. So, what do you think would have happened if John had watered his plants? I'm sure that if John had watered his plants, they would have stayed alive. That would be the result of the condition. Now, in what tense is the condition? It's in past perfect tense. And what about the result? The form is would plus the present perfect tense form of the verb. So now let's go ahead and make the sentence. We've got the condition and the result. First we add if, and it goes before the condition. Then we add the comma, and that separates the clauses. Note that the condition is in past perfect tense and the results form is would plus the present perfect tense. So, how did you learn to recap irregular verbs? So that's what we'll be doing in our first core topic for this lesson. We did cover this in more detail in our Module 1 Lesson 6 bonus lesson, so you can always refer back to that if you need a better understanding. There is also a full list of the irregular verbs in the Module 1 Lesson 6 summary notes. Are you using irregular verbs correctly? As I mentioned in the last lesson, when using conditionals, you may need to use irregular verbs. And since conditionals contain a wide range of tenses, irregular verbs will change depending on the type of tense used. So you'll need to understand irregular verbs to use certain tenses in conditional sentences. So, not all tenses are affected by irregular verbs. These are the tenses in which irregular verbs behave differently. There's past simple tense, past perfect tense, present perfect tense, and future perfect tense. Unfortunately, irregular verbs follow no logical or consistent rules. You'll have to memorize them. But don't worry, you'll get used to them quite quickly, and soon they will be second nature. Now, here is a small table with some information about the different verb forms of 4 irregular verbs. Now, the full version of the table is in the Module 1, Lesson 6 summary notes. Verb 1 is the base form of the verb. In other words, it's the simplest form. Verb 2 is the form of the verb we use in past simple tense only. And verb 3 is the form of the verb we use in all perfect tenses. And these tenses are past perfect, present perfect, and future perfect. Remember that the 4 tenses mentioned here are the only tenses affected by irregular verbs. For past simple tense, we use verb to. So we will only use the verb to column in the table. Here are some examples. I bought a car. I chose the biggest room. I cut my hand by accident. My dress tore at the event. For past perfect tense, we use verb 3. The formula is had plus verb 3. So we will only use the verb 3 column in the table. Here are some examples. I had bought a car. I had chosen the biggest room. I had cut my hand by accident. My dress had torn at the event. Now let's look at some examples to see how this manifests in conditional sentences. In the type 3 conditional, an example sentence with an irregular verb would be, if I had chosen more wisely, I'd be happier. This is in verb 3 form because the verb is in past perfect tense. In the type 2 conditional, an example sentence with an irregular verb would be, if I bought a house, I'd decorate it however I want. This is in verb 2 form because it's in past simple tense. Now that we're on the same page about irregular verbs, we can begin to talk about mixed conditionals. This is the last type of conditional sentence you'll be learning about. So, when do we use mixed conditionals? We use mixed conditionals when the condition and the result refer to different times. Now, you may be thinking, didn't all the other conditionals also refer to different times? Well, not quite. The other conditionals contained different tenses, but not different times. Time and tense are not always the same thing. Let's start by looking at the type 0 conditional sentence. This is the example we used in lesson 1. If you put water in the freezer, it freezes. The condition is in present simple tense, and the result is also in present simple tense. And in reality, they both refer to the present. But with the type 1 conditional, it gets a little more complicated. The condition is in present simple tense, whereas the result is in future simple tense. The tenses are different. But let's look at the condition. If it rains. Are we actually talking about now? No, we're talking about the future. The hypothetical event of rain takes place in the future. So even though it's in present simple tense, it refers to the future. Of course, the result, I will cancel my camping trip, also refers to the future, because cancelling the camping trip is a hypothetical result that takes place in the future. Do you notice that the condition and result both refer to the same time, the future? Now let's look at the type to conditional. If I won the lottery, I would buy a house. The condition is in past simple tense. The result is in the form would plus the base form of the verb. But to what times do they refer? The condition refers to the future, and so does the result. They are hypothetical events that take place in the future. Winning the lottery is a potential future event, and so is buying a house. Do you see how, even if something is in past tense or in the base form, it can still refer to the future or even a different time? Now let's look at the type 3 conditional. If he had studied harder, he would have passed his test. The condition is in past perfect tense, whereas the result contains the word would plus present perfect tense. But even though the tenses are different, they refer to the same time. The condition, if he had studied harder, refers to the past, since the act of studying would have taken place already. The result, he would have passed his test, refers to the past too. So even though the tenses are different, the condition and result refer to the same time. But in mixed conditional sentences, the condition and result refer to different times. The good news is that the possibilities are endless. There can be different time combinations in different mixed conditional sentences. So you are free to mix and match as you please, as long as you stick to the right tense conventions. But there are two very common mixed conditional sentences. There are sentences with a present condition and a past result. And there are sentences with a past condition and a present result. We will now explore these two types of sentences. We'll start by looking at the mixed conditional with a present condition and a past result. Have a look at this sentence. If I weren't so sick, I would have attended your party. The condition is, if I weren't so sick, and the result is, I would have attended your party. We'll start by looking at the tenses. In what tense is the condition? It's in past simple tense. What about the result? The form is would plus the present perfect tense. Now, to what time does the condition refer? Not tense, but time. Don't let the past simple tense fool you, because the condition actually refers to the present. I am sick now. It's a present condition because the condition is true now. And what about the result? To what time does it refer? It refers to the past. The party happened already. One very important note is that when referring to the present time, we say if I were, not if I was. The same applies for he, she, it, they, and we. Great. Now let's have a look at a mixed conditional sentence with a past condition and a present result. If I had gone to bed early, I would be less tired now. The condition is if I had gone to bed early, and the result is I would be less tired now. Now, in what tense is the condition? It's in past perfect tense. What about the result? It's would plus the base form of the verb. So, to what time does the condition refer? It refers to the past. The hypothetical event of going to bed early would have happened in the past. But the result, on the other hand, refers to the present. I am tired now, and I wish I had gone to bed early last night. You may notice that this is quite similar to the type 3 conditional because we're talking about a hypothetical past result. But in the type 3 conditional, both the condition and the result refer to the past, whereas in this case, the condition refers to the past and the result refers to the present. Let's take a quick break to have a chat about what you can expect in Lesson 4. After 3 lessons about conditionals, I'm sure you're looking forward to changing it up a bit. The good news is that you'll learn some speaking skills in the next lesson. You'll learn all about idioms, which will be super helpful in your day-to-day life as well as in the IELTS Speaking and Writing section. If you can use figures of speech correctly, that will really impress your examiner. We will also talk about some connected speech habits. In your listening lessons, you've started learning how to listen to connected speech, but now you'll learn how to use it yourself to sound more natural when you speak. So I hope you're looking forward to learning some new speaking skills in Lesson 4. Back to this lesson, we will now have a quick practice session to see if you understand the difference between tense and time. What's the tense and what's the time? If I weren't afraid of snakes, I would have picked it up. Let's start by looking at the condition. If I weren't afraid of snakes. In what tense is it? It's in past simple tense. But to what time does it refer? It refers to the present, because I am still afraid of snakes now. Now let's look at the result. I would have picked it up. What's the tense? It's would plus the present perfect tense. And to what time does it refer? It refers to the past. The opportunity to pick up a snake has already happened. Again, let's look at the tenses and times in this sentence. If I had saved money, I would own this house. Let's start by looking at the condition. If I had saved money. What tense is it? It's past perfect tense. And to what time does it refer? It refers to the past. The opportunity to save money was in the past. Next, we'll look at the result. I would own this house. What's the tense? It's would plus the base form of the verb. And to what time does it refer? It refers to the present. We are talking about now. I would own this house now if I had saved money in the past. Now, I want you to know that if you're feeling confused right now, that's completely normal. It takes a while to know the difference between tense and time. When reading, try to find instances where the tense and the time are different.